When my daughter screamed, "I wish you'd die like Mom did," I stood on the edge of the bridge ready to pull the trigger. But as my finger tightened, a call from an unknown international number changed everything. "Caleb, your wife is alive. She's been a prisoner for 10 years. I was standing in the doorway of Skylar's bedroom when she screamed the words that finally shattered what was left of my soul. "I hate you. I wish you'd die like Mom did." The air in our cramped, moisture-laden hallway seemed to freeze. Time didn't just slow down. It stopped pinning me against the peeling floral wallpaper that Elena had picked out a lifetime ago. Skylar's face was twisted with a rage so sharp it felt like a physical blade, her eyes flashing with a cruelty I didn't know a 17-year-old could possess. Behind her, leaning against the doorframe with an air of practiced lethal indifference, stood Sterling III. He didn't just stand. He occupied the space like he owned the foundation beneath our feet. He adjusted the cuff of his $1 200 cashmere sweater, a garment that cost more than I earned in a month of back-breaking night shifts, his hand resting possessively, almost mockingly, on Skylar's waist. He flashed that smug Ivy League smile, the kind of smile that only comes from a bloodline that has never known the word no. "Skylar deserves a real father, Mr. Miller," Sterling said. His voice was a smooth, educated drawl that dripped with a condescension that made my blood boil. His eyes scanned my oil-stained forklift operator uniform, lingering on the black grease embedded deep under my fingernails with undisguised disgust. Not some broke loser who works the night shift and can't even afford her college application fees, let alone the tuition. "My father always says success is a choice. Maybe you should have made better ones instead of wallowing in the past." The words hit harder than any physical blow I'd taken during the midnight rushes at the warehouse. I stood there paralyzed, watching my only daughter, the girl I had raised alone for 10 years, the girl whose hair I had learned to braid from grainy YouTube videos, whose nightmares I had chased away with whispers and warm milk, choose this arrogant boy over the man who would have died for her. "Get out," I managed to whisper. My voice sounded hollow, like wind blowing through an empty cave. "Gladly," Skylar spat back. She grabbed a designer overnight bag, a sleek leather piece I hadn't seen before, no doubt a charity gift from the Sterling family. "Sterling's parents are taking me to tour Stanford this weekend. They actually care about my future. They don't want me rotting away in this dump of a town washing my clothes in a bathtub because you're too incompetent to fix a 20-year-old washing machine." She pushed past me, the heavy scent of her expensive perfume clashing violently with the smell of industrial exhaust and stale sweat on my skin. I followed them to the front door, my legs feeling like lead. I watched as Sterling opened the passenger side of his metallic blue BMW M4. The engine roared to life with a high-pitched, expensive scream that seemed to laugh at my rusted 2004 Ford F-150 parked in the gravel. As the red glow of their taillights disappeared into the rainy Northwood night, the silence that followed was deafening. The house felt impossibly cold. I walked into the kitchen, the linoleum floor creaking under my work boots. On the scratched wooden table sat a pile of pink past-due notices and an empty cereal box. For 10 years, I had convinced myself that love was a currency, that if I worked every double shift, if I skipped meals so she could have the latest iPhone, she would understand. But standing there in the dim light of a flickering bulb, I realized I was just a ghost haunting her climb to a better life. I walked to my bedroom, a room that still held the faint, lingering scent of lavender and dust. I pushed aside the albums filled with photos of a man I no longer recognized, a man with a smile and a wife. Behind them, hidden in a shoebox, was my old service revolver. The metal was cold, heavy, and indifferent. It was the only thing in this house that offered a final, quiet answer. I grabbed the keys to the Ford, tucked the iron into my waistband, and drove toward the only place where the world finally made sense, the bridge. The rain was a torrential sheet, the windshield wipers of my old Ford F-150 groaning as they struggled to clear the blur of the road. But the blur wasn't just on the glass, it was in my mind. 10 years ago, my life didn't smell like warehouse grease and cardboard dust. It smelled like Elena's lavender perfume and the sweet earthy scent of the Colombian coffee she insisted on brewing every morning, even when we were late. Elena was more than just my wife. She was the light that made my world visible. She was a whirlwind of energy from Cartagena, a woman who had arrived in Florida with nothing but a suitcase and a smile that could stop a heart. We had met at a gas station at 2:00 a.m. when her radiator blew. I didn't have a ring in my pocket that night, but I had a quarter. I told her if the gumball machine gave her a red one, she had to marry me. She got the red one. We built a life on Maple Street in a 2-story house with white shutters she painted herself while 5 months pregnant with Skylar. I remember her singing folk songs in Spanish as she brushed the white lead over the wood, her belly bumping against the ladder. Everything changed on October 15th. A date burned into my soul like a brand. There was a storm, much like this one. Elena was driving to visit her sister, crossing the old Sunshine Skyway Bridge. I had stayed behind to finish a massive project at the mill, a decision fueled by ambition and the need for a holiday bonus. That decision has haunted every second of my existence for 650 days. The news came at 10:15 p.m., a catastrophic structural failure. 12 cars had vanished into the churning black guts of the bay. The recovery team spent weeks pulling twisted metal from the silt. They found Elena's rental car, her purse still sitting on the passenger seat, but her body was never found. The current was too strong, they told me with practiced sympathy. They handed me her wallet, still damp, containing a photo of the three of us at a Christmas carnival. I spent months walking the shoreline, calling her name into the gale until my voice was nothing but a raspy whisper. I had to sit a 7-year-old Skylar down and explain that Mommy was a star now, all while my own heart was a jagged hole of grief. When the paper mill closed 3 years later, the American dream we had built became a mockery. I took the night shift at the distribution center, trading my dignity for $19.50 an hour. I watched Skylar grow up, but I also watched her grow cold. She saw the other kids in Northwood with their summer homes and trust funds, and she began to view my sacrifice not as an act of love, but as a lack of hustle. By the time Sterling III entered the picture, I had already lost her heart. He offered her a world of private jets and prestige, a world built by his father, the man who owned the very warehouse where I broke my back every night. To Skylar, Sterling was a lifeline. To me, he was a mirror reflecting every failure I had ever made. Now, sitting in the cab of my truck, the bridge loomed ahead like the skeleton of a prehistoric beast in the fog. My back was ruined. My bank account was overdrawn by $40, and my daughter wished I was dead. I was a relic of a collapsed life, and it was finally time to join the wreckage at the bottom of the bay. I parked the Ford at the highest point of the bridge. The hazard lights blinked rhythmically, casting a rhythmic orange glow against the iron cables that looked like the bars of a cage. The wind howled through the steel, a mournful, high-pitched scream that felt like Elena's voice crying out from the water below. I stepped out into the rain. Within seconds, my uniform was soaked, the heavy fabric clinging to me like a shroud. I walked to the railing and looked down. The water was a black abyss, a churning mouth of white foam and cold death. It looked inviting. I pulled the service revolver from my waistband. The steel felt strangely warm against my freezing palm. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crumpled warehouse receipt, the only scrap of paper I could find. With a hand that refused to stop shaking, I wrote a final message. Skylar, I am sorry I wasn't the man you needed. I am sorry the world was too heavy for me to carry for us both. My life insurance policy is in the top drawer of the desk behind the photo of your mother. It's not much, but with the equity in the house, it should get you through Stanford. Build the life you want, Sky. Don't look back at the grease-stained hands that tried to hold you up. I love you more than life itself. Don't be ashamed of where you came from. Love, Dad. I folded the note and tucked it under the windshield wiper, weighted down by a heavy lug nut I'd kept in my pocket. I climbed over the first railing, my boots slick on the wet, vibrating metal. I sat there, legs dangling over the edge of eternity, the gun resting in my lap. I thought about the gumball machine. I thought about the red Keo that had started it all. If I did this, Skylar would be free of the loser she hated. She would marry into the Sterling Empire, get her degree, and never have to wash her clothes in a bathtub again. I raised the gun. I pressed the cold, circular mouth of the barrel against my temple. The world narrowed down to the drumbeat of my own heart and the roar of the Atlantic. My finger tightened on the trigger. I took a deep breath of the salt air, ready to let go of the pain. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen glowed like a flare in the dark. Unknown international number. I stared at it. "Not now," I whispered. "Just let it end." But it kept buzzing, a persistent, annoying reminder of a world I was leaving behind. A flicker of instinct, or perhaps a ghost of Elena's song, made me lower the gun. With a numb thumb, I swiped to answer. "Yeah," I croaked. "Is this Caleb Miller?" The voice on the other end was frantic, distorted by static and the sound of distant, rhythmic banging. "Caleb, please. My name is Ramon Vega. I am calling from Cartagena, Colombia. I have been searching for you for months. This is about your wife, Elena Miller." The gun slipped from my lap, clattering onto the narrow maintenance walkway behind me. "This is a sick joke," I screamed into the phone, the rain stinging my eyes. "My wife has been dead for 10 years. Who the hell is this?" "She didn't die, Caleb. Listen to the words I'm saying." The man was desperate now. "She was kidnapped on the bridge. She was taken before the car hit the water. She's been alive this whole time, held as a ghost in the jungle. She escaped 3 weeks ago. She's in a hidden clinic in the hills, but she's dying of pneumonia and exhaustion. She told me to tell you about the gas station. She told me to tell you that Skylar's first word was Papa, because you used to dance with her in the kitchen to the radio. Caleb, she's right here. She's fighting for her life." The bridge, the rain, the black water, it all vanished. There was only the voice, the impossible, terrifying, beautiful voice of a truth I wasn't prepared to hear. "I don't believe you," I whispered into the phone, my voice cracking as I slumped against the cold steel railing. The gun lay forgotten on the maintenance walkway behind me. I saw the car being pulled from the silt. I saw her purse. I signed the death certificate. I've lived in a funeral for 10 years, Ramon. Don't do this to me. "Caleb, listen to me." Ramon's voice was a jagged edge of urgency over the static. "The men who took her, they weren't just criminals. They were professionals. They pushed her car into the river to make it look like an accident. They needed her gone because of what she saw on that bridge. She has been a ghost laborer in the Colombian jungle for a decade, forced to work in agricultural camps owned by a logistics arm of the cartel. She escaped 3 weeks ago during a transport accident. She's in a hidden clinic, but she's dying, Caleb. Her body is giving out." I collapsed onto the wet metal, the rain soaking into my skin, but I didn't feel the cold anymore. "I'm sending a photo," Ramon said. "Look at it, now." My phone buzzed. I opened the message with trembling fingers. The woman in the hospital bed was skeletal. Her skin was the color of parchment, her hair streaked with white, and her face was lined with a decade of unspeakable suffering. But the eyes, those dark, honey-colored eyes, were Elena's. She was holding something in her hand, a small weathered object. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. It was a red gumball, cracked and faded, but unmistakable. "She needs a medical evacuation flight and bribes to clear the Colombian port authorities." Ramon's voice turned clinical. "The cartel has eyes in the local police. We have to move her in a private medical plane within 48 hours or they will find her and finish what they started. It will cost $30,000 Caleb. Cash. Untraceable. Can you get it? $30,000. It might as well have been 30 million. My savings account had $84 in it. My credit cards were maxed out from Skylar's graduation fees and the interest on the mortgage. I looked at the revolver lying on the walkway. An hour ago, I was ready to die for a life insurance payout. Now, I needed to live to save the woman I had spent 10 years mourning. I didn't go to a bank. I didn't go to the police. I drove straight to the most expensive zip code in Northwood, the Sterling estate. The gates opened automatically, sensing the transponder on my truck that I used for warehouse deliveries. Sterling 2 sat in a leather-bound library that smelled of old money, expensive cigars, and power. He was a man who didn't just own things, he owned people. He looked at me with the same clinical detachment one might use to examine a broken machine on his factory floor. "You're late for your shift, Miller," he said, not looking up from his tablet. "And you're dripping water on a rug that costs more than your house. I assume you're here to quit?" "I'm here to sell you my house," I said, my voice steady for the first time in years. He finally looked up, a thin, predatory smile touching his lips. "The little ranch on the corner, the one that's holding up my luxury condo development. Why the sudden change of heart? Caleb, last month you told my lawyers you'd die before you sold your memories. Because memories don't pay for plane tickets." I said. I leaned over his mahogany desk, my wet uniform dripping onto his documents. "The house is worth $350,000. I owe $280,000. Give me $70,000 in cash tonight. I'll sign the deed over to you right now. I'll rent it back from you for $1 a month until Skylar finishes school. You get your land and I get the money I need." "And why do you need $70,000 in the middle of a storm, Caleb?" I showed him the photo of Elena. I watched his eyes. For a split second, a strange shadow crossed his face, a flicker of something that looked like terror quickly masked by his usual arrogance. "My wife is alive," I said, "and I'm bringing her home." Sterling 2 studied the photo for a long time. He stood up, walked to a safe hidden behind an oil painting, and pulled out several stacks of $100 bills. "70,000, he said, thudding the money onto the desk. "My lawyers will have the papers ready by 8:00 a.m. If you miss a single signature, I'll have the sheriff toss you and your daughter onto the street by noon. Do we have a deal?" "Deal," I said, grabbing the cash. As I walked out of the mansion, I saw Sterling III and Skylar in the grand hallway. Skylar looked at the heavy bag of cash in my hand, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. "Dad, what did you do? Why are you here?" "I'm doing what I should have done 10 years ago, Skylar," I said, not stopping. "I'm bringing your mother back." The next 36 hours were a blur of adrenaline fear and the kind of exhaustion that makes your bones ache. I wired $30,000 to an escrow account in Bogota and spent the rest on a last-minute flight to Cartagena and a private ambulance waiting on the tarmac in Miami. Ramon met me at the airport. He was a small, wiry man with eyes that never stopped moving, the kind of man who survived by knowing which shadows were safe. We drove 3 hours into the coastal hills past sprawling haciendas and hidden camps to a clinic that was little more than a concrete bunker with a buzzing generator. When I walked in, the smell of antiseptic and damp earth hit me. Elena was hooked up to an oxygen tank. She looked so fragile, her skin translucent against the white sheets. I walked to the side of the bed and took her hand. It was freezing, but her pulse was there, thumping like a drum against my palm. Her eyes flickered open. She looked at me, and for a second I saw the 24-year-old girl at the gas station again. "Kale," she rasped, her voice a ghost of the laugh I used to know. You came for me." "I never left you, Elena," I sobbed, pressing her hand to my cheek. "I'm taking you home, right now." The flight back was the longest 5 hours of my life. Every time the plane hit turbulence, my heart stopped. I watched the heart monitor like it was the only clock in the universe. Elena drifted in and out of consciousness, her hand never letting go of mine. As we descended into Miami, Ramon leaned over to me. His face was grim. "Caleb, there's something you need to know. The reason Elena was taken, it wasn't a random debt, it was the bridge." "What are you talking about?" "Elena was driving behind a truck that night," Ramon whispered. "A truck owned by Sterling Construction. She saw them dumping bags of sand and substandard filler into the concrete mixers, cheating the mixture for the bridge supports to save millions. When the bridge started to sway, she pulled over to call the police. They saw her. They couldn't let her talk. They kidnapped her and staged the accident to cover up the fact that the bridge collapse wasn't an act of God, it was corporate murder. My blood turned to ice. Sterling II hadn't bought my house to help me. He had bought it to keep me close to monitor me and to ensure that if Elena ever did reappear, he could crush us before the truth came out. He had been paying for her disappearance for a decade. The drive from the airport to our house was silent. Skylar sat in the back seat, her hand white-knuckled as she gripped her mother's. She hadn't said a word since we picked them up, her eyes wide with a crushing, visible guilt. When we pulled into our gravel driveway, the metallic blue BMW M4 was already there. Sterling, too, and his son were standing on our porch like they were the welcoming committee for a house they now technically owned. "Welcome home, Elena," Sterling, too, said, his voice as smooth as silk. "Caleb, I've brought the final lease papers for you to sign. $1 a month as promised. Let's get this over with." I helped Elena out of the car. She stood shakily, leaning her entire weight against me. As she looked up at Sterling, too, I felt her entire body stiffen. The recognition was instantaneous. "You!" she rasped, her voice vibrating with 10 years of suppressed terror. "I remember your face. You were in the black SUV that night. You watched them drag me from my car while the bridge was screaming behind me. You told them to take me where no one would find me." The color drained from Sterling II's face, replaced by a dark, predatory mask. Sterling III stepped forward, looking confused. "Dad, what is she talking about? You said you were helping them." "She's confused, Sterling. Malnutrition does things to the brain," the elder Sterling said, stepping closer to us, his voice a low threat. "Caleb, sign the papers and take her inside. Don't make a scene you can't afford." "I'm not signing anything," I said, pulling a digital recorder from my pocket, the one Ramon had given me on the plane. We recorded everything Elena remembered. The truck numbers, the names of the guards, and the fact that you've been wiring money to Colombia for 10 years, and the federal authorities are already on their way. Sterling III looked at his father, then at Skylar. "Sky, tell him to stop. My dad is trying to help you. I paid for your applications. I bought you that bag." Skylar stepped forward, her face tear-stained but resolute. She threw the designer bag at Sterling III's feet. "You didn't pay for anything, Sterling. I found the documents in your father's office last week when I was touring the house. I knew about the bridge. I knew they were hiding something, but I didn't know Mom was alive. I only dated you to get close to those files. I was trying to find proof to sue your father so my dad wouldn't have to work himself to death anymore. I played the part of the ungrateful daughter so they would trust me. I'm so sorry, Dad." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant approaching wail of sirens. Sterling, too, realized the game was over. He turned to walk to his car, but his own son stood in his way, looking at him with pure horror. I was standing in the doorway of the house I no longer owned, watching the sunset bleed over the northwood horizon. The silence was finally a peaceful one. In the living room, Elena sat in her favorite armchair. She was wrapped in a thick wool blanket, her breathing assisted by the machine, but her eyes were bright. She was watching Skylar, who was sitting on the floor at her feet, showing her photos of everything she'd missed the first days of school, the soccer games, the moments I had tried to capture but could never truly explain. Sterling, too, and his son were gone, their empire crumbling under the weight of federal indictments and the testimony Elena had provided. The American dream they built on sand and corruption was finally washing away. I walked over to the mantel and picked up the small glass jar. Inside, the red gumball sat like a sacred relic. It was cracked, the sugar had turned to stone, and it looked like trash to anyone else. But to us, it was the anchor that brought her back across 3,000 miles of jungle and ocean. "Kale," Elena rasped, reaching out her hand. "Come sit. Skylar is telling me about the time you tried to bake a cake for her 10th birthday and almost burned the house down." "It was a controlled fire," I joked, sitting on the arm of her chair. Skylar laughed a real genuine sound that I hadn't heard in years. She reached up and took my hand, her grip firm. "It was a disaster, Dad. But it was the best cake I ever had." I looked at my hands. They were still scarred, still stained with the ghosts of grease. But for the first time in a decade, they weren't empty. They were holding my family together. The difference between an end and a beginning is often just one moment of grit, one decision to answer the phone when life calls from the shadows. My name is Caleb Miller. My story isn't a fairy tale, and our scars will never fully fade. But as I look at my wife and daughter, I know one thing: as long as you're still breathing, your story isn't over.